The engine was dying. The plane was being hijacked through its own navigation system. 200 people had no idea. My brother was in business class telling me I had wasted my life. Then the captain said 2 words into the intercom, my secret military call sign, and I stood up, walked into the cockpit and flew us all home. My brother Ryan always had something to prove. Even at 30,000 feet above the Arabian Sea. Even on the day we were flying home to bury our father. Even when the cabin was dim and quiet and the other passengers were sleeping with their heads tilted against the windows. Ryan still found a way to make me feel like I did not belong. He turned from his seat in business class, row 3 just past the curtain, and looked back at me with that expression I had known my whole life. The one that was not quite a smile. The one that said, I have already decided what you are, and nothing you do will change that. Sarah, he said, loud enough for the row behind him to hear. You should have taken Dad's offer when you had the chance. A desk job at his firm. A real salary. Something you could actually show people. He paused. Instead of whatever it is you do that you can't even talk about. I did not answer. I was sitting in row 12, seat C. Aisle. My jacket was folded in my lap. My bag was under the seat in front. I was wearing dark trousers and the kind of plain, structured top that does not announce anything. I had not worn a uniform in 2 years. I had not needed to. Ryan shook his head the way he always did when he thought I was being difficult. Then he turned back around, put his AirPods in, and disappeared into business class. I opened the small notebook I always carry. Black cover. No label. Entry 1. Altitude 30,000 feet Ryan. Predictable. Verdict. Noted. I closed it and looked out the porthole window at the dark ocean below. The last time Ryan and I had been on a plane together, I was 17 and he was 22. We were flying to see our grandmother in Lahore. He had spent the whole flight explaining to me why I should study law. I had spent the whole flight looking out the window at the clouds and thinking about how they looked different from above than they did from the ground. Thicker. More real. Like something you could actually walk on if you were careful enough. I did not become a lawyer. Our father never said he was glad about that. But on my first solo flight, a small trainer aircraft over the Sindh plains, nothing classified, nothing important, he had driven 2 hours to the airfield just to watch. He stood outside the fence with his hands in his jacket pockets and he did not wave. He just watched. And when I landed and taxied back and climbed out, he was still standing there. Still quiet. But his eyes were the eyes of a man who had just seen something he had not expected to be proud of. He never told Ryan about that day. I never asked him why. I felt it before I heard it. 20 minutes into the flight, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not the kind of thing that sets off alarms or makes passengers grab their armrests. It was quieter than that. A change in the engine note. A drop in frequency that lasted 2 seconds, recovered, then dropped again. I pressed my heel flat against the floor of the aircraft. Felt it through the metal. Right engine. Uneven fuel burn or something worse. A compressor irregularity that had not yet reached the instruments but was already writing itself into the vibration of the aircraft. I had spent 9 years learning to read aircraft the way some people read faces. You stop trusting what is visible and start trusting what is felt. You stop waiting for things to announce themselves and start catching them before they can. My instructor, a retired wing commander named Tariq who had the patience of someone who had survived too many difficult landings to be surprised by anything, used to say, the aircraft always tells you the truth. The question is whether you are listening or just hearing. I was listening. I unbuckled my belt. The flight attendant, her name tag said Hina, turned when she saw me stand. Ma'am, the seatbelt sign is still on. I know, I said quietly. There is something wrong with the right engine. I need you to contact the cockpit. She studied my face for 3 seconds. Training fighting instinct. Then instinct won. What kind of wrong? She said. The compressor cycle is breaking. You have maybe 7 minutes before the instruments confirm it. By then it will be harder to manage. She did not argue. She turned and walked to the cockpit door. The co-pilot was the one who opened the door. He looked at me, young, composed, but his eyes were measuring something. She says there's an engine issue, Hina said. Right engine, I said. Compressor stall developing. You will see the thrust differential in about 4 minutes. I would recommend not waiting for it. He stepped back slightly. Come in. The cockpit was dark and precise and familiar in the way that things are familiar when your body knows them before your mind catches up. 2 seats. A panel of instruments glowing amber and green. The captain, older, gray at the edges, was already looking at the gauges with the focused stillness of someone who had been in the air long enough to know that stillness is a skill. He turned when I walked in. He looked at me for 2 full seconds. And then, quietly, carefully, like reading something written in small letters, he said, Ghost Anchor. My call sign. Classified. Used only in 3 operations that were never publicly confirmed. Not in any file a civilian pilot would ever have access to. The cabin went very still around those 2 words. Who gave you that name? I said. Dispatch briefing, he said. We were told that if Ghost Anchor was on board during a navigational emergency, we had full authorization to request assistance. He paused. I didn't think it would actually happen. Someone had known I would be on this flight. That was a question for the ground. Right now, the engine was the only thing that mattered. Show me the panel, I said. Right engine thrust, 58% and dropping. Left engine compensating at 131%. Navigation route, off course by 4 degrees and drifting. Slowly, quietly, the kind of drift that does not trigger automatic alerts but ends, eventually, in airspace that no civilian aircraft should enter. Someone had accessed the secondary navigation system. We have been rerouted, I said. Internal. Buried in the nav stream. Whoever did this planned it to look like a technical drift. The captain's jaw tightened. Can you correct it? Yes, but I need the left seat. He did not hesitate. He moved. I sat down. The yoke was cold and familiar under my palms. Every aircraft has a personality, a way it wants to move, a way it resists correction when you come at it wrong, a way it softens when you handle it right. This one was heavy on the right, wanting to pull toward the compromised engine. I adjusted without thinking about it. The adjustment was already in my hands before my brain had finished naming it. Disengaging autopilot, I said. Copy, said the captain. The plane breathed. A small, real shudder as control transferred from the computer to my hands. I felt the whole machine settle into my palms. 300 passengers. 2 engines. 1 drifting flight path. And a question I had not yet answered about who had arranged all of this. Cutting bleed air from right engine, I said. Rerouting hydraulic control to secondary systems. The instruments responded. Right engine stopped its decline. Left engine pulled back from its overcompensation. The gap between them closed like a held breath being released. She is holding, the co-pilot said. Then I entered a manual navigation override. Not the original filed route. Not the hijacked secondary route. A third path, a clean corridor I knew from years of flying this region. That would bring us back toward Karachi approach from the northwest, away from the restricted zone, away from whoever was listening. For minutes. Clean. Done. The captain picked up the cabin intercom. His voice went through every speaker on the aircraft. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are experiencing a technical issue with one of our engines. The situation is being handled. We have a qualified aviator assisting us, a specialist with extensive military flight experience who happens to be on board tonight. Please keep your seatbelts fastened. We are safe, and we are bringing you home. He did not say my name, but he said enough. And then, because the cabin intercom had not been fully closed, his voice came through once more, quiet, directed at me, not at the passengers. Ghost Anchor, thank you for being on this flight. 200 passengers heard it, including Ryan. I know what happened in the cabin because Hina told me afterward. She said Ryan sat up when the captain's first announcement came through. She said he looked around, looked at my empty seat in row 12, and something moved across his face that she had not seen on a passenger before. Not panic, not understanding exactly, something quieter than both. She said he did not move for the rest of the flight. He held his glass of water in both hands and stared at the headrest in front of him. He did not drink the water. He just held it. She said at one point he asked her, "The person flying the plane, is it a woman?" She said yes. He nodded very slowly. He said, "Dark jacket, row 12?" She said yes again. He did not say anything after that. She said he looked like a man going through a drawer he had not opened in years, pulling things out one by one and holding each one up to the light. When the captain's second message came through, "Ghost anchor, thank you for being on this flight," she said. Ryan closed his eyes. He kept them closed for a long time. Karachi came up through the cloud cover like scattered light, gold and white and blinking. The coastline caught the edge of the moon. The runway stretched out ahead, long and familiar, and I brought the aircraft down the way you bring something home when you know it has been through enough. Steady, slow, exact. First wheel at 140 knots. No bounce. Second wheel. Smooth. Reverse thrust. Full stop. The cabin went quiet, that particular quiet that only happens when people have been holding their breath for a long time and suddenly remember they do not have to. Then someone started clapping. Then the whole cabin. I sat back and rested my hands in my lap. Captain Imran looked at me. He did not clap. He nodded once, slow, deliberate, the way one professional acknowledges another when words would only make the moment smaller. "Ghost anchor," he said. "That's the job," I said. I walked back through the plane. Heads turned. I did not look at them. I kept my pace steady and my eyes forward. But when I reached row 12, Ryan was standing in the aisle. He had gotten up the moment the seatbelt sign went off. He was standing there with his jacket folded over his arm and his phone in his hand and an expression I had not seen on his face since we were children. Not the measured smile. Not the careful mockery. Something open. Something that did not know what to do with itself. "Sarah," he said. "Ryan. Was that you? Were you flying this plane?" "Yes." He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the floor. Then he looked at me. "I didn't know," he said. "I mean, I knew you flew, but I didn't know it was like that." "You never asked," I said. Not cruelly, just as a fact. The way you state a fact when it has been true for a long time and you are tired of working around it. He swallowed. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what I said earlier. And for," he stopped, started again. "For a lot of things. For a long time." I looked at my brother. He was still Ryan. Still the person who had spent our whole lives telling me what I was. But he was also, in this moment, standing in an aircraft aisle at midnight, saying two words he had never managed to say before. "I know," I said, and I walked past him. Not away from him. Just forward, the way you always walk when there is somewhere to go. Outside the gate, two people in uniform were waiting. Behind them, a woman in a dark suit with a government identification clipped to her jacket. She stepped forward. "Sarah Malik?" she said. "Depends on who's asking." She smiled. Genuine, tired. The smile of someone who had been waiting a long time for something to finally go right. "Director Farah, Civil Aviation Security Division. We have been tracking a navigational interference network for 8 months. Tonight was their first active deployment." She paused. "We put your name on the dispatch list as a contingency. We hoped you would be on this flight." "You hoped?" I repeated. "We planned," she said. "And you delivered." She handed me a sealed envelope. Red tab. "Heavy stock. Your clearance has been restored," she said. "Full access. There are people who need to understand how the secondary navigation system was accessed. They want your help." I looked at the envelope. I thought about 9 years. About classified operations that no record confirmed. About my father, who had known what I did, in the broad way that fathers know things they cannot ask about directly. About the last conversation we had, 3 weeks before he died, when he had said, very quietly, as if saying it too loud would cost something, "You have always flown right, Sarah." I took the envelope. "When do we start?" I said. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tonight. Go be with your family." The funeral was 2 days later. Ryan and I stood side by side at the grave. He did not make any speeches near me. He did not try to fill the silence with the kind of words he usually used to fill silence. He just stood there, quiet, holding his prayer beads, looking at the ground. Afterward, at the house, he made tea the way our father had always made it. Too strong, with cardamom and too much sugar, and we sat on the back steps in the dark and drank it without speaking for a long time. Then he said, "Did he know what you actually did?" "Some of it," I said. "Was he proud?" I thought about those last words. "You have always flown right, Sarah." "Yes," I said. "He was." Ryan nodded. He looked at the sky. "I wasted a lot of time," he said, "thinking I knew what you were." "You did," I said. "But you stopped tonight. That counts." We drank our tea. The stars over Karachi were very clear. 3 months later, a letter arrived. No return address. 1 page, handwritten in careful English, from a girl named Zara in Islamabad. She said she was 20 years old and studying aerospace engineering. She said her father kept telling her the field was too difficult for someone like her. She said she had read a small article, 5 paragraphs, buried on an aviation news page, about an unnamed female pilot who had manually corrected a compromised aircraft over the Arabian Sea and landed safely with 200 passengers on board. She said she had read it 11 times. She said, "I don't know your name. The article doesn't say it. But I want you to know that I did not quit. I was going to. And then I read about you. And I thought, if she can fly a broken plane home in the dark, I can survive 1 difficult exam. Thank you for not letting go." I read the letter twice. Then I folded it and put it in my notebook. The black one, behind the entry I had written on the night of the landing. Entry 41. Status home. Engine. Recovered. Navigation. Corrected. Brother. Still learning. Self. Still flying. I am not Ghost Anchor anymore. That name belonged to a version of me that worked in the dark and left no trace. I fly in daylight now, consulting, training, teaching young pilots how to listen to an aircraft the way you listen to someone you love. Not for what they say, but for what shifts underneath. Ryan calls every Sunday. He still sometimes says the wrong thing, but he asks questions now, real ones, and he listens to the answers. That is enough. The sky does not care who believes in you. It only cares if you know how to fly.